we're going to look at the chart for signals of disproportionate reporting. So the first thing we do is go into the configuration panel, and then we look at picking a product name. I'll leave it at carbon neutral. But my choices here for this demo data, very limited data, is either the brand name or the generic name. In the real world, I'd probably also throw in active ingredient, and I don't want to plot active ingredients, especially because active ingredients are shared across brands sometimes. The dimension here from the Madras side is I only have PT, preferred term, and even that I probably have 5, 6 in there. But in the real world, obviously, I'd want to put all 5 in there. I'd set it up to have all 5 and have as much data as possible. There's these filtering options here, and I will have a video for filtering that goes more into how filtering works. And then we have the thresholds, which say when the SDR, or signal of disproportionate reporting, is generated. We will go into that as well, but let's just first generate the grid. So as you can see, the grid is being generated and it is locked. All that means is when I scroll to the right, the first 2 columns are locked, giving me a reference point basically as to what product we're looking at, what the PT is. If I were to unlock it and I were to scroll, it would, I would lose that reference, but to each his own. If you like that, feel free to unlock it. The other thing you'll notice is that the numbers, or the calculations that are shown here may not necessarily are not in fact in sequence, because obviously the starting point for everything is A, B, C, and D. These are counted from the database, and then everything else is calculated from that. But we basically placed it in terms of what is more important. And a lot of people want to see PRR first. That kind of gives you a sense of where things are going. So that's up here. Now, whatever is counted, nothing happens. There's no value change, color change, or anything like that. But anything that's been calculated, yeah, you will see the orange back highlight. And if you click on that, you would see the formula. So what it does is it shows you the formula as it applies to A, B, C, and D, and then the application of the formula by substituting A, B, C, and D, and deriving that number. So that's pretty much the same for everything you see here. And there's also this thing which shows you which tells you really what the each of these numbers mean, or at least what the definition is. Same thing with standard deviation, sigma. If I click here, I would see the formula. The only exception is p-value. P-value does not have a formula. So for p-value, what I would do is let's just do this one. This is red, we'll talk about that, but let me just do this one. We'll click here, and what it does is it gives us, because there's no formula, there's a series of iterations that need to be done. The simplest way to do that is to verify this number is to do it in Excel. Here's the formula in Excel. This allows you to copy it. We go to Excel, and we paste it here. And the number we get is 0.010043, and we see that it was 6.6272, our chi-square. And what we did was we got the p-value for the right tail with a degree of freedom of 1. Come back here, and yep, we are saying 6.672, and degree of freedom is 1. And the number is indeed 0.0010043, which is what it is here. And the chi-square here is 6.6272. So now as to why this is red. In the thresholds, we have the setting which says p-value threshold for statistical significance has to be less than or equal to, and the default value is 0.05. So if it is less than 5%, it'll come up in red. It'll show up in red. And this is a signal to the user that this needs a little deeper looking into. In our case, obviously, these are all sample data, so it's merely a coincidence that the number p-value came out that low. Now, the other thing we want to look at is, this is the data panel. So I can click on data panel and I can export this to Excel. If I were to do that, it'll show up. There you go. I'm going to open the file from my downloads and it should open up any moment. And so this is the file we just saw with the same descriptions or definitions of what these columns are, what they stand for, D number of cases, and it pretty much has the same thing, and anything in red will show up in red, obviously. Now let's go and plot this as a bubble chart. So, but before I do that, I want to talk about Yates correction. So if you're a fan of Yates correction and you want to apply that correction, that adjustment to your chi-square, all you do is click here, regenerate, and now the chi-square that shows up, it tells you that Yates correction has been applied to it. And if you look at the formula, sure enough, there's that negative 0.5 taken away to adjust it. Same thing with the A component or the B component of chi-square. If I go to click here, negative 0.5 subtracted. So you can also apply chi-square Yates correction to the chi-square. Now we're going to generate bubble chart. So here we're plotting chi-square on the y-axis and PRR on the x-axis. And the third number in a bubble chart needs three measures basically. So the third measure obviously is A, and the size of A, 235 versus 275, for example, it basically affects the size of the bubble itself. Now you see a red line here, and this is where our thresholds come in. So by default, a threshold is that we are going to, an STR is signal of disproportionate reporting, is going to be generated when chi-square is greater than the number 4 and PR is greater than 2. So basically this quadrant where the mouse is. Let's go back to our configuration panel and we're going to look at a couple things here. So what we want to do is, so here's the thing, either these two conditions are met, then SDR is generated, or these three conditions are met. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this 2 to 1 just so we can see how it's interactive. Change this to 2, the chi-square, and I'm going to regenerate the chart. So now when I do that, suddenly these two that were somewhere in the safe zone before are now here where an SDR regenerated, and I would need to, or this would be my signal to look deeper into these numbers. And so you can basically change the value of the threshold, the default thresholds, and you can always save these reports so you can come back to it. There's an option to save report. We'll talk about saving reports a little later in another video. Let's go back to grid. One more thing before we do that. You can always export this image too. So if I do save as image, it'll come down. And there's two, when I'm saying it's an image, the image is kind of nice and it's there and everything, but it does not have the true context of what was chosen, what we were doing, anything along those lines. So here's the image, no worries. I'm going to close it. And then it also downloads a text file called filters. And the reason for that is because that filters file kind of shows us all the filters that were applied. So we know what's going on. Okay, let's go back and generate the grid again, and then we'll see what else there is. So the other thing we saw in the threshold was we can also get a low sample warning will be generated if, and then here we have, these are 4 conditions. One of them has to be met, A or B or C or D. So I'm going to go and change A to 250. I'm going to say generate a low sample size warning if my expected A is less than 250. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to regenerate it. And sure enough, there's a couple of reds here. We'll talk about that. But let's first look at the 250. So our expected A was 249.745, slightly below 250. Hence the small sample size warning. Now, when we were looking at the bubble chart, we also changed the value of our PRR threshold and our chi-square threshold. So the first time we saw this grid, these numbers were not in red. But after changing the threshold, interactivity is in both spheres, I guess, in the chart itself and the grid as well. So when you change the threshold values, the quadrant in which a particular bubble falls can change in the bubble chart, and then here in the grid it just turns red to kind of signal to you that you ought to be looking into it. The other thing I want to talk about is not this. Let's go back and let's go and export this to Excel once more. So these numbers will show up in red, of course, because that's what we generated. The other thing is there's two more tabs here, or two more worksheets here, and one is the filters that were applied. So when you send this to someone as a report, there's some context there as to what filters were applied to it, what was incorporated into these numbers, and similarly what thresholds were applied. So when you see something that's turned red in this Excel spreadsheet, you can come to this thresholds sheet and see what the thresholds were. There is also confirmation report available. I'm not going to generate it. This is a sample data. This is running on the browser, on the client. So confirmation report takes a long time to generate. In contrast to running the production system on a server, and then it's blazing fast. So we're not going to generate the confirmation report, but the confirmation report basically gives us all the cases, underlying cases. So if you see that, if you look at these numbers, say, well, what cases comprised of this? This would print out the list of cases for you to look at, say, okay, these are the 1,000 or 1,000 plus or 5,000 cases, 50,000 cases, as the case may be, and we'll list them out. Export to ToroViewer is being disabled. The idea of exporting to ToroViewer is an interactive file, HTML file that you can send or give to any other stakeholder who may be interested in this. So they don't have ToroCube. They can't change things around and generate a chart. But taking a generated chart, they can play with it, and they can change the thresholds, for example, and move it around and see what how things change. They just can't generate a new one or change, for example, the from Medra PT to Medra SOC, or from product A to product B. They can't do that. If you generated a chart with product A and PT, they're they're completely relegated to that. But within the context of that product and that PT, list of PT, they can change the thresholds and still see the interactive nature of this chart. And you can send it to them. For the demo, we have disabled the export to ToroViewer because it needs to be working on a server. So this is the pretty much the end of the video for SDR. Thank you.